Hi everyone. So for this assignment, I chose the child abuse and neglect topic to discuss. And so just in summary, per our textbook, child abuse is any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act or failure to act which presents an imminent risk of serious harm. And I think a lot of times when we think of child abuse and neglect, we kind of think of the obvious things that we kind of see in our society, like physical abuse and violence towards children, or neglect in terms of a parent being absent or not providing basic needs for their children. But there's other scenarios where we can see child abuse and neglect that aren't as obvious, such as doing futile treatments that might be invasive or cause the child pain and might be unnecessary in medicine. Um, and a couple of viewpoints on the issue. So some things that I came across is regarding the punishment of abusers or neglectors. So there's viewpoints, should there be more familial intervention with like social worker to try to get the family unit more stable and safer for the child, or should there be immediate punishment of the abuser or neglector? And looking at that, it made me look more into critical theory and kind of correlate with that. Because critical theory is the broad term of identifying theories and worldviews addressing the domination perpetuated by a specific powerful group of people and the resulting oppression of other specific groups of people. So in the case of whether or not to punish abusers right away versus trying to intervene, it kind of makes me think about the abusers potentially being the more powerful group, and the child or the victim being the more oppressed group in terms of critical theory. And then another example would be, on an instance of child abuse or neglect. For a one-time offense, does that child get separated from their parent or their household family members and get put into foster care, or are there multiple chances given for the abuser? And kind of thinking it in that regard made me think of more utilitarianism in terms of promoting the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So that can kind of go either way with this scenario. Is it the greatest good to separate the child from their family, and therefore that child would not be harmed anymore? Or is it the greatest good to not do that and keep that child with the rest of their family? Kind of who, like, this greater good is positively affecting which group of people, like more people. And then one example from history, or I guess not recent media, but the baby doe laws were developed in the 1980s. It was the Child Abuse Amendments of 1984. And these all started with, in the 1980s, there was a couple who had a baby who was born with Down syndrome and other medical complications, but not life-threatening without intervention. So the family decided not to pursue medical treatment for this child who had Down syndrome for their other medical problems, and because of that, the child passed away But during this hospitalization of the child, the physicians and the healthcare team felt like the court should intervene, that this child should have some treatments done because they would be life-saving. And ultimately, the baby doe laws were passed, or sorry, the baby doe rules were created, which essentially state that imperiled newborns were said to be handicapped citizens who could suffer discrimination against their civil rights. Um, so the federal law forbids discrimination based entirely on a person's handicaps. And institutions that violate these regulations can be punished. So basically, a child with Down syndrome who has other medical needs cannot be neglected treatment for those other needs just because of their other handicap. And I thought that was interesting because that's kind of more on the neglect side, since the parents were refusing treatment for that child, and the baby doe rules came about that. And then I thought it was interesting kind of reading more just in history. The earliest known case of child abuse was back in 1874, and it was regarding a 10-year-old girl who was named Mary Ellen Wilson. She was adopted from an orphanage, and her adoptive father passed away, and so her adoptive mother was taking care of her but couldn't handle the stress from her husband dying, and so she abused Mary Ellen Wilson. And there were no agencies to go to at the time, and so what I thought was interesting was the ASPCA, so the American Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, was the agency that Mary Ellen's caseworker went through to get the case brought to court and then ultimately revoke custody from the birth mother. But from there, the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children was founded. So I just thought that was interesting. And then, child abuse and neglect certainly is relevant to the field of nursing. Nurses are mandated reporters, so any signs of abuse or neglect for children, we have to report that. And I think also just in terms of being a nurse, we are the most hands-on member of the team, and so kind of trusting our guts when we kind of suspect abuse or neglect in a child is going to be extremely important, so that we can advocate for that child who might not otherwise have a voice, or might not know what's going on, might not know that they're actually potentially being abused or neglected. And so it is our job to be patient advocates, even obviously for kids, and even more so for kids, since their parents, their family might not be the ones advocating for them. So yeah, thanks.